John.
Zuby, what's good, man? How are you?
I'm doing great, Will. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. There's a lot going on, and we're going to get into that. But first, I would imagine a wild amount of our fans here are going to be aware of who you are. But who do you say you are?
Sure thing. So my name is Zuby. I am by trade a professional rapper, author. I host a podcast called Real Talk with Zuby. I'm also a public speaker and social media coach. I was born in the UK. My family background is originally from Nigeria. I grew up in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. I lived there for about 20 years, went to school there until I was 11 years old. And then I went to school in the UK and university in the UK as well. And I'm known by a lot of people for a lot of different things. Some people know me more for my music, other people more for my podcasts and appearances on others, as well as other forms of media. And other people know me predominantly through social media. But I'm someone who overall, my goal and message for the past 20 years has been to positively inspire and uplift as many millions of people as I can through my words. So that started out just being through my music and the albums and songs I was putting out. And then over time, that's evolved into some additional platforms as well. So that's what I'm all about.
Awesome. What is it about us Nigerians that won't let us just sleep? Why can't we just... You sound like me. You're like, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing well with this and I'm doing this, but I'm trying to bring positivity. That's pretty much Nigeria for the most part, the diaspora. But cool, man. Listen, yeah, like you said, very multi-talented. I wanted to actually start just a little bit with your upbringing before we get into some of the stuff that's going on in the world today. What was it like growing up in Saudi Arabia? And did you have to speak? Were you isolated from them, like to some degree? I know how some expats can get in like their own like little communities. Were you mixed, or how did that work?
Sure thing. Yeah, so I grew up in a predominantly expat community. My parents used to work for Saudi Aramco. So I grew up in an Aramco camp. I'm what's known as an Aramco brat. So there's a lot of us scattered all over the world from growing up over there over the decades. And so honestly, where I grew up was a little bit of a bubble. I mean, I grew up in a very small camp. So, when I say camp, it's essentially a small town where every single person works for the same company, right? It's an Aramco camp. And so, man, where I grew up, there were about 2,000 people, perhaps, maybe around 800 families, something like that, if I were to estimate it. And that was the environment I grew up in. It was kind of like I imagine growing up in an American suburb, like a suburb of Houston or a suburb in Orange County or something like that in terms of what the architecture and vibe was kind of like. But then, of course, you are in Saudi Arabia. So where I lived, there was only one school, one major shop. And if you wanted to do or go or see anything interesting, then you had to go outside the camp. So it's not like I was just in that bubble and I never got to sort of see the real Saudi Arabia. If you wanted to go shopping, most weekends you'd go to Al Khobar or Dammam or Hofuf, one of the bigger cities in the east. And yeah, once you're there, you're more in real and proper Saudi Arabia. But overall, I had a great experience, not just for myself and my family in general. I mean, all of us like living there, but also for the majority of people who I grew up with. If I were to talk to any of my friends from when I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of them scattered all over the world and from all over the world, the vast majority of us would have a lot of good things to say. It was extraordinarily safe. The amenities were very good, great people. So overall, it was a positive experience. I can't speak for everybody else's. Just like if I were to ask an American, what was it like growing up in what's it like growing up in the USA? It's like, that's a pretty broad question, right? I mean, the people can only speak from their own perspective and the people around them. So what would it have been like for a Saudi national growing up in that same time in a whole different area of the city? I'm sure they have, the whole different area of the country. I'm sure they'd have a different perspective. And even amongst them, they'd have different perspectives depending on who they are and how their experiences are. I'm sure you'll find a lot of great positive stories. I'm sure if you search, you could also find some horror stories as well. But I would assume that is true of virtually any country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it interesting, just the expat life. I mean, I've traveled a whole lot myself. Did you have to learn Arabic?
Unfortunately not. I wish I did have to. But they only taught Arabic to the Arabic students. So in the school I was in, if you were a child from whose family background was from Syria or Jordan or Egypt or something like that, then you got Arabic lessons all the way from kindergarten upwards. But it didn't become an option for Western students or non-Arabic students until 6th grade. And I left after 5th grade. So unfortunately, I hate to say that I lived in Saudi Arabia for as long as I did, and I speak pretty much no Arabic. It's a shame. It's a shame. I really wish that things had been slightly different and that they just put it in the curriculum. But obviously, as a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, you're not going to go out of your way to take on extra lessons beyond the curriculum because it's not until you get into your adult life and you're reflecting back and you think, oh, that would have been great. But
For sure.
hey, maybe we can do it a little differently for my own future kids.
TheWayOfWillJohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
Yeah, funny enough, like we said just before we started, recording, we have a language education company, and we are deep within that. The way languages are generally taught within the traditional system in school all across the world, where you have, maybe 3 times a week, 45 minutes, and they make you study the rules, is not the way that language, and nor is essentially going to Duolingo and just hoping that this app can basically solve it for you. However, especially in the West and in America specifically, that is kind of, we always flow to the easiest means of communication or the easiest thing that's there. That's why we can't remember any numbers anymore. We put them in our phone. It's good. It's there. It's gone. Back when we were kids, obviously you had to remember a number in order to dial it in. And so, yeah, I find it things are probably going to change within the language world. We're hoping to be a part of that. But moving to something that you discussed quite a bit on The Real Talk. As an American, and as an American who's lived abroad for some time, although I spent a little bit of time before this last election, things are changing in the whole scope of things is changing. I actually got into let's say, I don't want to say an argument. I don't know how an altercation. That makes it sound worse, maybe.
Argument is fine.
Yeah.
Debate.
Well, it wasn't really an argument. It was an interview. Let's put it to say, just with Don Lemon. I'm not sure if you know who that is. And it was a whole thing while I was in New York, and then it kind of got pushed over to Elon Musk and all this whole stuff. It was a wild little ride that we're kind of continuing to deal with, and a lot of it centered around the trust that we have in the government and the trust that the people have seemed to have lost worldwide, not just in America, but it seems that a whole lot of places find, let's say, they find their governments to be inadequate with regards to having their best interests at heart. So my question to you is, now that we have this, and there's this change from wokeness to kind of a more realness and where we're headed, where do you feel that the scope is going? Because you've positioned yourself tremendously well to have on the people that you've had, and I've seen some of the discussions that you had. So I'm very curious your actual thoughts on where we are headed over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, with all the changes that are happening.
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. If I could sum it up, I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that we have entered a new phase. So I think that the period from about 2014 to 2023, going into 2024, I'd say that decade was a rather unique time in modern, Western in particular, human history. I started to notice the early beginnings of what people have come to now sort of collectively know as wokeness. Before that, really, people were calling it social justice. If you remember, sort of mid to late 2010s, you used to hear the term social justice warrior, SJW. For whatever reason, that got dropped after some time and people started calling it woke or wokeness. But this combination of modern academic identity politics, predominantly based around race and sexuality and gender, and then the injection into all of the transgenderism philosophy and, what people call critical race theory, and lots, some people would call this cultural Marxism. But all of these ideas, which have existed in some form for many decades, they went from fringe academia subjects and fringe corners of the internet into mainstream society. So in the past decade, everyone suddenly, if you were to just go back to the year 2012, most people had probably never heard the word transgender, right? The concept that a man could identify as a woman or anything like that. Outside of certain fringes, most people had never heard of that concept, for example, or the idea that all white people are racist. Not some people are racist, but all white people are racist, and only white people can be racist because they changed. The definition is no longer having hatred or sense of supremacy or discriminating against someone based on their race or their ethnicity. People from the left wing started saying, no, you need to be in a position of institutional power in order to be racist. And all white people have this sort of white privilege and so on. Just all of these narratives, prior to the mid-2010s, they were not mainstream at all. I would wager that the vast majority of people had not heard of any of these theories or ideas, and certainly were not championing them. And then for whatever reason, it all just went really mainstream, to the point where for the past decade, people have been arguing over how many genders there are, and if a man can get pregnant, and if women can have penises, and if men should be competing against women in their sports, and if all white people are racist, and if you should be teaching children about all of these ideas. Just all of these concepts became, they got injected into the school system. It went mainstream across colleges, not just in the USA, but also in UK and Canada, in Western European countries. It got into the politics, right? The mainstream politics. You have politicians out there, people in positions of power, promoting and championing these ideas. And then you get into the whole concept of equity. And instead of talking about, what you and I probably grew up with, equality of opportunity and treating people fairly and treating people equally, it started getting into, no, we need to have equal outcomes. And in fact, we should have diversity quotas, and we need to have this number of Black people and this number of LGBTQ people and this number of this. It just got weird, man. Like as you saw, it just got weird. We had riots. We had, autonomous zones being set up. We just had all of these strange ideas. And I think that all of that stuff is dead in the water at this point. It doesn't mean that people aren't still pushing it, and some people haven't updated their software and narratives, but compared to where things were, say, in 2016 or even in 2020, compared to where they are in now, and I'm not just talking about the US election, I'm talking about the wider culture. I'm talking about the wider narrative. I think we're in a very different position to where we were 4 years ago, let alone 8 years ago. And we're seeing a massive pushback. The pushback is now mainstream. I mean, Donald Trump went from losing the popular vote but winning the Electoral College in 2016 to whatever happened in 2020 to winning both the popular vote and the Electoral College in the last election very comprehensively. And I think that's a real strong repudiation and pushback of all the stuff that had been being pushed. I think a lot of it wasn't so much political, it was cultural, it was social, and the narratives have just changed. I didn't even mention everything that happened during the pandemic period and all of the bizarre behavior that happened then, and all of the promotion of discrimination and a genuine segregation across the population and nastiness. So, trust in the mainstream media is probably at an all-time low right now. At the same time, we have independent creators of all sorts of size, individuals like ourselves, to media companies, to groups and organizations who are gaining more and more ground and gaining more and more trust. And yeah, we're just at the very early stages of a new position. So I think that people who are, I'm not even going to just say conservative, because I think this is beyond conservatism and liberalism. I would just say people who are truth seekers and people who are normal to some degree and who are not sort of hardcore caught up and obsessed with some of these narratives and ideologies. I think this coming decade, it's going to be ours to win or lose. So it's like the adults are kind of back in charge, I hope. And it's up to them and us more widely as to what is going to be done with that megaphone. What are we going to do with that power if for the next decade, let's say, if it's conservatives and sane liberals and sane libertarians and just people who are more open-minded and pro-free speech, when those people have the reins of power, let's say, what are we going to do with it, right? Are we going to run off a cliff just in the other direction, as the way the left has done over the past decade, because they certainly have had the cultural narrative for the past decade, if not more. Like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope and pray, if I'm being honest with you, that this next decade is going to be better than the previous one. I think that things are decently well set up for that to happen. But I would just say humbly that it's a little bit too early in the game for me to say, okay, this is where we're going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But I do quietly, confidently think that we'll be in a better place, and there will just be more of a sense of normalcy, and there will be less of, I think there will be less fear overall. I think a lot of the last decade was dictated by fear of speaking out, fear of cancellation, fear of being discriminated against because of anything from your skin color to not being on board with certain narratives to not wanting to inject certain things in your body. Like, there was just a lot of fear over the past decade. And I think this next decade is going to be less fear-based and hopefully more inspiring and more optimistic.
One of the most important things that I have learned interviewing all of these high performance leaders is that clarity of mind is crucial to your success. And what good is clarity of mind without clarity of sound? Which is why today's podcast is sponsored by Rode. We across Golarami use exclusively Rode audio equipment in order to do all of our stuff. If you are an influencer, if you're just a person out there trying to make some good content for your stuff at home, wherever it is, Rode is by far the best audio partner we have ever had. We have been using their stuff for almost 5 years now. Has never let us down. Truly incredible company, especially with all of the other affordable things that you guys can get from them. Check out the link right down below and enjoy the rest of this podcast.
Yeah, I think I would agree wholeheartedly, man. I'm cautiously optimistic, especially over the short term, because you can see that we're still correcting, and it seems like what you're saying, the power seems to be pushing back into the more sane minds. We're constantly in flux, though, as humans. And I mean, as a lover of history and watching, and reading about civilizations and how they move back and forth and how power changes hands. And, I've had some great discussions with, some teachers at the NYU University wrote a book, The Dictator's Handbook, Bruce Buena de Mesquita. And it's fascinating to see how decisions get made when power is the only thing that you are trying to hold on to, rather than the people at large or whatever. When there's manipulation of that sorts, when the goal isn't to help the many, you end up with a lot of things that we actually can pretty much characterize. Like it's happened many times throughout society. And so I am also cautiously optimistic over the near future. And like you said, I think the long-term future is still in our hands, but we've got to see what we do with it. And so with that in mind, one of the things that's also popped up throughout all of this is a new renowned belief, let's say, or interest in the term the deep state, specifically in the US. Where do you see the role of that playing out? Because when you're saying, obviously, that these independent creators and media and people who are sane across, regardless of party, wanting to move things towards normalcy, towards less fear, towards more peace, more harmony, in that sense, there's always a hidden hand, regardless of if you want to believe when we say in the deep state, but there are always people who aren't necessarily pushing against that narrative. Where do you place the deep state and their role now that they're going to have to react to what's happening?
Yeah, well, I think that, maybe it might help to first sort of define what the deep state is. I think different people have different connotations of that term. For some people, it's a, shadowy cabal that is lurking, and we don't know their names, we don't know their form. There's probably people who don't even think that they're human beings. They're some extraterrestrials or reptilians or something like that. I mean, I like to talk about things that we can sort of define and characterize. And I think the form of deep state, which we absolutely do know exists, is a network, let's say, a group of non-elected officials who have lots of power within politics and perhaps also within culture. We all know that in a constitutional republic like the USA, any country that has democratic voting generally, you have the actual administration who you vote for, right? People vote for the president and his sort of main administration. People vote for mayors, people vote for governors, but then you have all of these officials. I mean, I believe the US government has over 2 million, the federal government has over 2 million employees, right? And so it's not like all 2 million of these people are voted for. And then you have individuals who have lots of money or power and or influence who are not even part of the government per se, but they are they're influential. They're in positions of advisory, whether formal or informal. They're friends, they're donors, they're lobbyists. All of these all of this to some degree could be called the deep state. So I think there's a version of it which is very obvious and clear. Okay, yeah, the deep state exists. And then there's another layer and people can go with tinfoil hat on that as they want. So what influence is this going to have? I think there's a bit of a changing of the guards going on. So it looks like the people who have been in these positions for many years, decades in many circumstances, they're generally not going to be happy with the changing of the guard because they have been profiting in some way, shape, or form for all of these years from being in these positions of power and influence. If you are a massive donor who has been, in a certain position for 10 years, 20 years, so on, if you have a multi-six-figure job and you're getting money off of different governmental contracts and things like that, you typically are not going to want things to change. It's just a matter of incentive. So I think you'll have a lot of the old guard in the deep state wanting to fighting, essentially. I mean, I think we're already seeing that happen. They're going to be fighting the change because they don't want things to change. People tend to want to hold on to power whenever they have it. If someone has got a lot of money coming in, whether it is legitimate or illegitimate, they typically want that money train to continue. So I think we can kind of just look at basic human behavior and we can predict what is going to happen. Now, with that changing of the guard, if we're being honest, there is and there will be another form of deep state that comes in. Maybe it's going to be smaller. It's going to be different people to some degree. Hopefully it's going to be better and more benevolent and more intelligent and more pro-humanity people. I don't think, I have an interesting idea about power, which follows the, I can't remember which numbered law it is, but one of those laws of energy, that concept that energy cannot be created or destroyed. I think the same is true of power. I don't think power can really be created or destroyed. I just think that it shifts. It can shift from the state or the government more into the hands of the people or more into the hands of other entities. In the past, for example, you've had religious institutions where they were doing a lot of the things that now governments are doing. Even if you had a society that was more libertarian or more of an anarchy, that would just mean that the power is in the hands of individuals and families and small communities. But I don't really think you can destroy power. I think power is just there and how it's dispersed amongst the population changes. So yeah, under that assumption, we're going to see. I just, like I said before, I just hope that the people who are now in positions of power are able to avoid many of the mistakes that were made by the previous administration or administrations, and that if we're going to call it the new deep state, is firstly, I think it's certainly probably going to be smaller. Someone could argue whether that's better or worse, but I think it's going to be smaller. And for the time being, I think overall, it's going to be people who are more capable. But as we know, money and power can be corrupting influences. So there always has to be a check and a balance on that. So again, cautiously optimistic. That's what keeps ringing in my head.
And speaking of new power, new influence, you had the opportunity to interview Elon Musk, who is now in a new position of power, one with which the left, and this is actually at the basis of the altercation that I had with Don Lemon, was the question that he immediately posed to me is, have you heard that the Democratic lawmakers are calling Elon Musk the president-elect, was the words that he said to me. And I had said, I don't know what he's talking about, but that's a whole another thing. The reason I bring him up, though, is I have two questions. The first one is, what do you think of him as a person, having spent the little time that you did with him? What sort of sense did you get? Because he's one of these people, 2,000 years down the road, it's going to seem like he didn't exist, really. He's going to seem like a myth, kind of like we talk about Socrates or some of these great, people. And we attribute all of these great things that they've done, and then we're just like, that's absolutely no way. Surely we're embellishing the achievements of that individual. He's one of these dudes. So I'm curious, firstly, and I'll get to my next question, what was your take on him, and what did you feel from him based on the conversation that you had?
Sure thing. So I've only met Elon in person once. We've had many interactions online and private conversations just via text message. And overall, I like Elon Musk a lot. I think that he is an incredibly inspiring person and clearly a brilliant mind and brilliant entrepreneur. I think people who try to debate that are pretty goofy, because I think just objectively, that's a pretty hard one to debate. I mean, to achieve just one of the things he's achieved, just to do Tesla in the way he's done it would have been a phenomenal achievement. But to do that and then also do what he's done with SpaceX, and also do what he's doing currently with X, and also be doing what he's doing with Neuralink, it's a lot, right? So in terms of his character, when I met him, I found him to be very amiable, humble, friendly, good sense of humor. For someone who is as high-powered and as accomplished as he is, I found him very down to earth, which was very pleasant, because there are people who have achieved, 0.001% of what he has, and they are very prideful and very arrogant and cocky about it. And he's not like that. I believe he has a genuine love for humanity. He's not one of these, there are a lot of people in powerful and influential positions and a lot of wealthy people who don't really love humanity. They have a bit of a disdain, they think the world is overpopulated and there's too many human beings, and they kind of view humans as a bit of a plague on the planet, and a lot of their thinking is downstream of that. And I think having such people in very powerful positions is ultimately dangerous. I mean, if someone believes the biggest issue on earth is that there's too many human beings, then that's naturally going to influence their thinking. So just the fact that he thinks the opposite is the problem. He thinks that underpopulation and lack of human beings is going to be, one of the biggest problems that humanity is facing. Just that on its own, as a kind of simple Occam's razor, I think puts him more on the good guy side. Now, with that said, he's a human being. And I think people always have to remember this. Remember this in all directions. Once someone achieves a phenomenal level of fame, celebrity, wealth, success, influence, as you already said, they kind of, even if they're still alive, they can become almost like legendary and mythical. People forget that they're just, people forget that they're a human. So this can lead to pedestalization and idolatry in a way that I think is rather dangerous. And it can lead to a lot of yes-manning and never wanting to ask any questions or have any sort of critique or offer any guidance, right? Just nod to every single thing that somebody says and does. And I think that's dangerous. And I think there's a danger on the other side where, I don't know, like I've seen people be like, oh, is he the Antichrist? And I'm just kind of like, can we just moderate a bit here? You know, I think there are reasonable criticisms and concerns, and there are reasonable things to cheer for and be inspired by. But I just think that, you know, and I hope that he himself knows this, which is that obviously the more wealth and the more power and the more influence that he accumulates, the more potential he has to do incredible good or incredible bad. Thus far, if I look at his career and I look at his companies and the things that he's doing, I think that he's a massive net positive on humanity. And I hope that he continues to move in that direction. As I've already said, wealth and power and influence, all of these things could be corrupting forces. And even I experienced this myself, right? I don't have a fraction of the wealth or the fame that Elon Musk does, but I have a lot more than I did 5 or 10 years ago, and it's continuing to grow. And I constantly have to sort of recenter and reground myself to not fall victim to pride, to not become arrogant, or to start thinking I'm, you know, better than other people, or to start thinking that I know it all because a lot of people want to talk to me and have me on their programs and have me on their platforms. And we've all seen this to happen to people, right? Where, for example, when people don't even ever want to say, I don't know, right? People just, you ask them about any subject, about anything, and they talk like they're a complete expert on every single subject. And not only that, they're highly intolerant of other perspectives. They're highly intolerant of anyone questioning that kind of thing. So we all have to be careful to not fall into that trap of hubris. So thus far, so, you know, if I could summarize it, yeah, I'm definitely an Elon fan. I'm cheering for him. I think that if somebody is going to be in the position that he is, I am glad that it's him, because I don't think most people would handle that level of, well, wealth alone, let alone power. I don't think most people would handle it well. All of the people who are very vocally criticizing him, if you were to give them his wealth and his influence and his fame, I do not believe that they would do any better with it. In most cases, I think they do a lot worse. And I think in some instances, they'd create a huge amount of damage. So I'm glad that it's him in that position. And I just pray that he is wise enough and has people wise enough around him, so that over the coming years, even over the next coming decades, that, you know, he does not himself turn into the type of person that he set out to oppose. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, that's always one of the great dangers. You know, many movements can start out to want to destroy something and then become that in trying to find their solution.
Isn't that wokeness? Isn't that literally what happened with
exactly
right? The anti-racism movement or the LGBT movement, right? It went from, hey, look, there's a group in society that's being mistreated, that there are laws against, that are being discriminated against, segregated. We need to help them out. It went from that to, you know, borderline supremacy, and saying that, okay, well, if you're in these categories, you're inherently a better or more virtuous person, or you deserve more space and a bigger microphone. And if you're in these other ones, hey, now we're going to discriminate against you because you're a straight white male, or whatever other goofy terms they use.
And, you know, it's interesting because when you were describing how you were basically trying to find a way, you know, a metric to put Elon Musk in, you touch on one of the subjects that's a very, very big trigger for a lot of people, which is essentially the transhumanist movement. This movement that's against humans, right? And it is something that I use also to kind of determine whether or not you have meaning ours, the common people, the common man's best interests at heart. If you're not pro-humanist, right, then what are you? Because if you're not with us, you're clearly doing something that is not going to benefit the majority of the people. We're not all, you know, in an elite position, let's say. And so, given that he is, you know, one of those people calling for, let's say, a pro-humanist type of movement, at the same time, I'm not sure what your questioning would be around AI or the Neuralink, which many people find to be anti-humanist, right? This merging with machines to some degree, and I believe he's answered this. Maybe I've seen it at least in some place, but I'm curious on your thoughts. where do you find that? Because on one end, of course, we have to put forward humans, humans, humans. On the other end, let's merge with machines and the internet. How do you conflate the two?
Yeah, sure thing. I asked him about this directly when I interviewed him in 2023. I did tell him just honestly that I'm a big fan of his different companies and his achievements and what he's doing. But the one thing that he is working on, which does concern me a lot, is Neuralink. And he didn't fully abate my concerns with that. I mean, his position is essentially that it's a very long time. It's very far away until it even has the potentiality for anything that you or I might be worried about. So I actually agree and don't have much opposition with the early phases of something like Neuralink. So if you're introducing a technology, which, for example, helps blind people to see, helps lame people to walk, helps provide a prosthetic limb for somebody who's lost an arm or lost a leg, enables someone who has some form of disability to gain or regain full, normal, human, healthy bodily function. I think that is a net good, right? I think that's a good. Hey, somebody can't hear. I'm not opposed to hearing aids. If somebody is unable to hear, even if I find the idea of sort of implanting something into your body a little bit strange, it's also not like we don't have these things. Some people have pacemakers, some people have metal replacements for their kneecaps, right? We already have people who you could argue, they've already got some technology integrated into them to restore normal function. What I am concerned about, and the concern I voiced to him, is moving into a world where in order to be quote unquote normal, or in order to be able to compete, you have to be modified. Okay, so if you think of smartphones, in 2008, if you didn't have an Apple phone or an Android smartphone or something like that, it was totally fine, right? You didn't need a smartphone in order to get around society,
Sure.
In 2008. But now in 2025, sure, having a smartphone is still a choice. You don't need to have a smartphone, but we're already at a stage where it's pretty inconvenient not to. You might even go to a restaurant and you can't see the menu because you can't scan the QR code and they don't even have the paper menu to give you, right? You might want to pay for your parking and there's no longer a machine to put your coins in or to even use with your card, and you have to scan a QR code or use an app, download an app and use it to pay for your parking. All of these types of things, let alone getting into the world of actual work and socializing and all these other things. It's much easier and far more convenient to have a smartphone as an adult than it is not to. So I could see a scenario, again, where I'm not talking 2 years from now, but I could see a scenario in the future where a tipping point is potentially reached and you have all of these people. Are they still going to be human beings? I don't know. Maybe some people would say this is a new evolution in humanity. You have these people who are somewhat merged with AI and they have got the chip in the brain and they've essentially got access to the internet just like in their own head without a separate device. And they're performing at a certain level and able to do other things. And just due to game theory, this now creates a pressure where other people feel like, hey, we're falling behind. I guess we also have to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to compete in the future. And maybe as soon as children are born, it's like, okay, the child is born, boom, day number 3, right? Plug them into the matrix. So that's what I have concerns around. Perhaps your concerns are similar, maybe they're different, but that's where I have those concerns. So it's not about the short term. It's not about the short-term implications. It's more about the long-term, just looking down the line, second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences of introducing this type of technology, especially at the same time where you're having massive advancements in AI, in robotics, in all of these other fields. They're all kind of coming at the same time. And I could very easily see 75 years from now, in the year 2100, there's so many different ways that future could look for humanity. It could look quite similar to what we have now, but just better. It could be a complete dystopia, like a whole world that is far worse by the way we would judge it. And, you know, people are lamenting the good old days before all of this technology took over. Or it could look completely different, but in a sense that people are like, man, how did we even live without this technology? Look at all this human flourishing going on. Look at all this happiness and joy, and look at how connected we are, and look at all the negative things that we've been able to put to bed. So what is that future going to look like? I don't know. I hope that it's going to be, better than it is now, but I don't think any of us can honestly say.
I think definitely pushing towards the fact that what you said. What happens if this group or this country is implementing it for their kids and this other country is not, and these kids are performing at test rates, you know, that are, you know, exceptional, and these ones are still performing not bad, but just nowhere near here. The pressure for them and for parents and for people to want to their kids is going to be massive. And I see that this is already starting. The AI boom that we have already, companies already immediately say they need somebody that understands AI and that's implementing it. They're pushing for their employees to already do this. I mean, it's a new technology. When that stuff becomes one with you, I see no way for anyone to deny that. There might be enclaves of people wanting to push against it, but that sort of society will not be most likely the dominant force for the ones who are plugged in, ready to use it, ready to multiply, able to move at the speed of technology that we've never seen before, you know? And so I see simply the implementation of it. While I agree with you, it's perfect. Like if you're deaf and it makes you hear, if you can walk, like all those things are tremendous, right? If we could do all that without also giving you the entire knowledge of the human race and making you rely on that within your head, might be, in my opinion, better, only because I think one of the things that put us in this position now as a society is because we are distracted at large. And I think attention is our one as the common people, your attention is the thing that you have. We all, as humans, all put our attention on one thing, and it's going to come crumbling down, or we're going to build it up in the way that we want. Having attention, you know, your attention dispersed or put into fear or mad at this race or this group of people or that country, that people, you know, completely throws it all over the place. If we're as a collective, it's impossible to stop. It's virtually impossible. And so when I see that most of the attention will be probably pushing there, it makes me think this is probably going to happen in some way, shape, form, or fashion. The speed with which it goes is a whole, you know, who knows, right? If you look at something like Google Glass and them trying to, and then Apple just put out the other thing that didn't go exactly what, like we're trying
like Vision Pro.
Right. We're trying. We keep trying. And every time, you know, when we were growing up, the Jetsons were things, flying cars and all this stuff. It was supposed to be here now. We're supposed to have flying cars, supposed to have all sorts of tubes that could shoot me across the world. It doesn't happen like that. So,
but we got 70 genders.
Well, those 70 genders they didn't predict. I didn't see that in any of the things. Everything still seemed like there was just two.
I'll tell you something do you know something that they never predicted, Will? If you go back and you watch old shows and they're predicting the future,
yeah,
they never even predicted smartphones or even cell phones in most cases.
Did you not think it was I thought it would happen. I had a phone with a calculator on it, and I just assumed that one day I'd be able to look at it and see things.
Yeah, no. If you look at old shows from, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and they're predicting the future, most of the time, like very, very few people ever predicted the smartphone. So that in itself is interesting, because something that is, I guess, concerning to some people, maybe exciting, is that we really have no idea. There's going to be something that is not even remotely on our radar right now that is going to be as ubiquitous, as predominant, as important as, say, like the smartphone and perhaps like the internet itself. So we're here talking about AI and robotics and brain chips. Like there's going to be some other technology that we're not even thinking about. It's not even on our radar. And maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40, certainly 50 years from now, it's going to be like just so entrenched in our society. It probably won't even be one technology. It's going to be multiple ones. So the unpredictability in itself, I guess, is a matter of concern, even when you're talking about things like Neuralink. And by the way, Neuralink is not the only company working on these sort of brain computer interfaces, I think they call them, that could go in all sorts of directions. You also have to remember that then you're also introducing a whole new area of potential dysfunction. So the human body itself is already a very complicated machine. I mean, I don't know how many different diseases and conditions exist, but there is a lot that can go wrong in the human body, right? Like there's so many parts, and just every bit of your body can like catch a disease, can have something go wrong, can get injured. And so if you're introducing this whole new technology, we already know about computer bugs and viruses and hacking and all this. It's like, I just think you're creating like an extra layer, many extra layers of complexity and things that could potentially go wrong. I mean, maybe that would be the thing that even stops it in its tracks. Because maybe we are here worrying that we're going to go into this future where everyone's got these brain chips and stuff. And it's like, you know what, maybe that experiment will just stop pretty early because malicious actors or even I don't know, like the companies who even manufacture this. What happens if they go bust? What happens if they don't put out software updates? What happens, what happens if there's like a virus? What happens if there's a hack? Are you going to be able to hack people? That sounds pretty scary. So maybe something like that'll happen, and it'll just be like, oh, you know what? We didn't even have to be worried about that. Like in the same way that Google Glass was more than 10 years ago.
I know.
Google Glass did not take off. Remember, just a few years ago, everyone was freaking out about the metaverse. Like, who's living in the metaverse, right? Nobody's living in the metaverse right now. So maybe, we are being, it's good for us to have our concerns, but it might be the case that all of it turns out to be a nothing burger. And it's like, you look back 20 years from now and you're like, oh yeah, we didn't really have to worry about that.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, flying cars are a nothing burger. It's not here. It's not happening. It's not a thing, where I believe that the thing that will win first, I think the problem is that the interface. It's the interface thing that we don't like. The most successful smart glasses are the Ray-Bans. Matter of fact, I have them right here. They're these Ray-Ban smart glasses right now. And the reason it's because, number one, people like Ray-Bans. Number two, they're not really like the Apple Vision or the Google Glass. The Google Glass making you look like a transformer walking around, with metal coming out of your face. I mean, they should have known that was not going to work. But, so what I think could win first, obviously could, is AR, augmented reality, something within our phone, something that is in our world here that is not, because we just don't we have some sort of like, I don't want to wear this, I don't want to look crazy, and I don't necessarily want to not be involved in the world. I, for the last 10 years, have always believed that AR is going to win first in some way, shape, or form, and that would give potential a chance for something that is more immersive to happen. Because with AR, at least, I could put a couch in my room that's not there and see what that looks like, and I could have information out in the world, right, while still being a part of the world. And so I feel like that could happen first, but then again, maybe not. Maybe we just skip it all, like you said, and then people are hacking into people's brains. I mean, that would be insane, though, if that.
It could happen. I mean, ultimately, it's extraordinarily difficult to get people to change their behavior. So for this sort of massive shift to happen at scale, it would require something that is like almost like a killer app, right? Something that is so beneficial and so helpful to people's lives and so convenient, perhaps that's the most important, that they're willing to integrate it and fundamentally change the way they behave. So smartphones definitely did that. The internet did that. It's so convenient and so beneficial and so useful and low intrusion enough that you are willing to alter your general behavior and move from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. I believe, and maybe this is a bit of a white pill for people and something to be optimistic about. I think that fundamentally human beings like being human and like to do human stuff. So even if, let's say, for example, I had a conversation the other day with someone who was talking about, artificial wombs and artificial means of reproduction and so on and so forth. We've also seen this with like the vegan meat and you know, the clear, right, like
Yeah.
over the past few years,
course.
all of these companies with their fake meat and
Yeah.
trying to do all of these different things. It's really hard to get people to even eat like lab-made meat.
Yep.
Right? You could come up with many arguments as to why it is quote unquote better to eat like lab-grown meat versus certainly say factory farmed meat. But it's so hard to change that thing that's just like
Yeah.
programmed in you as a human animal, right? Yeah, there might be more, according to, you know, if we just think of like convenience and we think of economics, it might make more sense for human beings to reproduce using like a lab full of artificial wombs than actually having sex and women being pregnant for 9 months and then going through the pain of childbirth and everything that that entails. But you know what? People might just want to keep doing it the old school way because we're human beings, we're animals, and that's what we do. And we have some natural disgust or dislike of the idea of human beings just like growing in vats in a lab, okay? Maybe there will be a small percentage of people who their children are born in a lab, but I would wager that the vast majority of humanity is going to continue to reproduce via sexual reproduction, no matter what the technology does, right? I just think that that's something that is going to be, thankfully, in my opinion, I think that's something that's like kind of very hard to just fundamentally change in people. Dude, think of how hard it is to get someone to change their diet or to change their exercise habits. You could give them every reason why they should do it, right? Like every reason, but it's hard. So change is very difficult for people, even when the change is for the better, let alone when the change is like, you know, maybe not so much for the better and it goes against our sort of natural wiring and programming. So maybe that's what will be the sort of most hardline roadblock against a lot of the things that we might be concerned about.
I mean, that is one of the most crazy things about human behavior and just, you know, as well as human potential. It's like, dude, the cigarette is definitely not a good idea, or this, you know, thing, like it's not good for you. I know. I'm still going to do it though. That's crazy. That's a crazy thing to do when you really sit down, like you have the option of doing a bunch of things that could help you, you know, and same with the meat. I've tried those. I don't know, was it Beyond Burger or something like that? I've tried, you know what they're trying to do is, this is what I'm telling you. This is why I feel that AR still could do it, because it has to be submersive. It has to be kind of, you got to put it underneath your it's got to go to the subconscious, you know, we've got to insert it like that. Because I've been to a restaurant, it was in Chicago, where they named their stuff meat names, but then didn't put meat in them. And then there was a little asterisk down at the bottom that, oh, everything here is plant-based. And so that was the way that they did it, is that you take a bite of it, it tastes good, they put other sauces and other things on there, and then you realize at the end of your meal, oh, hey, by the way, that was, you know, lab-grown, you know, meat. And like that, you know, it's almost like you have to be tricked, because if you know you're eating lab-grown, you prefer something else. And so it is just a wild thing. But when we're talking about changing behaviors, there's another big change happening, and that is we are starting to move to this digital, and also obviously cryptocurrency, and this whole age of digital, you know, acceptance of things, moving away from cash in this whole society. Where do you see that playing out? How do you feel with a society that is cashless? Are we going to get there?
I don't like the idea, and I don't want us to get there. I think doing that would mean giving up some degree of power and sovereignty, which we currently have and which we have always had. So I am definitely not a fan. Like when I see stores that say they don't accept cash, I think that's stupid. I also think it's stupid from a business perspective, because I think you should, if somebody's trying to pay you, I have a general rule in business, like make it easy for them. Of course. Don't make it, right? If someone's trying to pay me and, you know, they're trying to give me $1,000 and I'm like, sorry, I can't take those 10 hundreds. You know, you've got to give it to me in 1,000 ones, or you've got to give it to me via Western Union, or I only accept Bitcoin. I think that would be goofy. In the same way, if someone wanted to pay me $1,000 in Bitcoin and I'm like, no, like it has to be in Australian dollars, I'd be like, no, like get a Bitcoin address and accept that money, man.
Right.
So look, I think this one's ultimate. A lot of these conversations we're having, the truth is ultimately it's up to the people. And I think that perhaps this is true through all human history. I think that one of the biggest problems with the average person is they don't realize how much power that they actually have, especially collectively. I think people like to think, oh, the power is with the government, or it's with the deep state, or it's with the WEF, or it's the globalists, or like people like to outsource power to other people. And when you do that too much, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have a choice, right? Every time you make a payment, you actually choose how you want to pay. So if you are someone who, this is one of the reasons why I still continue to use cash to some degree, right? I use card as well, but I'm always gonna also use cash, and I'm certainly gonna accept it because I'm cognitively aware that that helps to keep it alive. So if people do want to move into a totally cashless digital society, that's most likely going to end up being their choice. And the other way around is probably going to be their choice as well. And I would imagine, just from what I know from traveling to different places and knowing a decent amount about the world, I think there will probably be some nations and some states and some jurisdictions where things move to predominantly digital only, because that's what the majority of people want, and it's what the majority of people accept and maybe even champion. And they'll move in that world. And then there will be many parts of the world where probably the majority of the world, even just because of technological limitations, is, of course, they'll keep using cash, right? You're not going to convince the entire continent of Africa or the entire continent of Asia or the entire continent of South America to stop using cash and just do digital only. No, that's not going to work.
No.
I was a big fan of the El Salvador making Bitcoin legal tender, but I see that recently, as we record this, they've recently moved away from that because mainly because of technological reasons. Because if something is legal tender, then it means that stores and merchants have to accept it. And just because of where the country is in terms of development and technology, I think it was putting too much of a burden. It was difficult for every single person, every single merchant to be able to accept Bitcoin. So it has a higher adoption rate compared to most countries. But even then, just because of the sort of convenience and the technological hurdles, it didn't quite work out. So I think for those of us who are raised in the West, we have a massive Western bias. But you have to remember that only something like 1 in 7 people in the entire world lives in the West. So 6/7 of the world is living in a very different place and way than people who might be listening to this from USA or Canada or the UK or Australia or Germany. Most of the world is not living like us in 2025. So just because the West is going in a certain direction, it doesn't mean that the entire world is going to go there or even that they can go there. So I guess that summarizes my thoughts on that.
Yeah. And it's funny because that is one of those, that pure point right there is one of the reasons that puts a curb on the spread of AI, the spread of Neuralink. That's not going to be able to take adoption immediately in South America across every single country, right? And the same in Asia and Africa, et cetera. And even, Europe, in Eastern Europe, in some parts of Central, it's just not going to work. Places where it could, I can see Scandinavia going completely. I mean, I spent a lot of time there in Scandinavia, and they're pretty much already there. They're cool. It makes for them, in their sense, they have countries that have a few million. They're very homogenous in their thinking for the way things should go. That's a place where I'm guessing they're going to be cashless and just all about it because they love it. They already have chips in them. That's one of the places where they have chips to go to the gym, to pay for your
in the hand.
In the hand, yeah, that thing. Yeah, they've got that. They're completely cool with it. It has, it doesn't carry the same level of hate, let's say, that it would in other parts of the world. And so I see that probably as being a thing.
You touched on something interesting there, which is that increasingly this century, one of my big predictions is just that we're going to just live in an increasingly multipolarized world. And people are also going to have more freedom to travel and relocate than they ever have before. So I see increasingly just people self-selecting. I live here in Dubai in the UAE. Almost everyone who lives in Dubai specifically chose to leave wherever they were and to come live in this city and in the country of the United Arab Emirates. So you have people here from, pretty much every single country on earth, and barely anyone is here by accident. People came here voluntarily. Low taxes, cleanliness, safety, entrepreneurship opportunities. Like there's various reasons why people choose to move to Dubai. And I think that you will have just more variation between all of these places. You were just talking about Scandinavia. I was in Sweden for some time last year. I've been to Denmark before. I've been to Iceland. And there will be people who prefer that model, whether that is, you know what, I'm happy to pay half of my income in taxes as long as it means that I get good health care and my schooling is covered and my child's university is covered and I get these other benefits and from the state, from the government, and I'm okay with the cashless society thing. I prioritize that over some sense of autonomy or whatever it might be. People weigh things really differently in their heads. So we already see this to some degree. Of course, migration is already a thing. Neither of us live in the countries that we are actually from. So we have chosen for our own reasons to migrate. And I think that is going to happen not just from east to west as people are used to and have been over the past century, but you're going to see a lot more west to east. You're seeing Americans moving even within the same nation, right? They're leaving California, they're going to Nevada, they're going to Texas, they're leaving New York, they're going down to Florida, they're moving to Georgia, whatever it is, because they want to be around people with their values. They want to have laws that meet what they think that the laws should be. And I just think we're going to continue to see that. So yeah, we'll probably end up with some of these much more digitized societies and nations, and then other ones which are more kind of old school or traditional or conservative, not just in terms of politics, but in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of society, in terms of technology. And I think more and more people are kind of going to realize they can pick and choose what they think is right for them, their families, and their future. So we'll see how that plays out.
I think what you're touching on, I think, is something that is interesting because we live in a world that is, yes, continually globalized in some sense, but you have these transnational companies, these transnational, really the bank, they don't care, right? And so to get to your point, I think there will be, like you said, like Zuby, you just said, essentially, that there will be these little enclaves of different places where you can go for different values and different things, kind of in the same way that we have countries, although they won't necessarily be pertainable to that country specifically. What I mean by that is that it won't just be because you're in America that you have American values. You go to Texas and you will pick up this, and you go to Austin because that's where they are and they're creating the music and all this, and that'll be that. And you go to Dubai because that's business and this and digital and that. And Scandinavia is all about cashless, and I think that will happen. But for the common man, because here's the problem, you get different rules depending on different passports that you have, right? And when I rock up with an American passport to a certain country as opposed to a Nigerian passport, you get a different set of rules. You get a different set. You're met differently, and it may be that Jalen is, also touching on is that yes, we may be able to choose, but not everybody. And also, there are financial requirements to some places being able to stay and being able to be there for a certain time. So you have your passport, you have your money, and so I can see that, and I know that that's actually one of the themes around is that supposedly, and we could call it conspiracy to some, is that they want these cities where people don't have to leave. They want these 15-minute cities. That's a conspiracy, or let's say a current thought that's going around. So I don't know what let's say this would be connected to the deep state and their idea of what they would want a society to be like. I don't know what it would really be like, but I find that there's still both. I would say that the one that is going to win is going to be the one where we want free movement and have free movement amongst the world, because it's still going to make sense, for trade, for money, for business, for family. I think it's still going to make sense to have it so open, but I see that there is also a movement to restrict it. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, sure. Of course, there's a movement to restrict it. There's also a movement for us to live in pods and eat bugs and not reproduce because it's bad for the environment. So people in general, what choice are you going to make, right? It's not Klaus Schwab or some nerd at the WEF who has the power to determine what all 8 billion people on this earth are going to do and what our future is going to look like. Can they create laws? Yes. Can they create immigration policies? Yes. Can countries change how easy or difficult it is to get a residency or a passport, change visa situations? Yes. But ultimately, I think the free market is going to win out. And when I'm talking about the free market, I'm not just talking about what people typically think in the economic and in the trade sense. I'm talking about cities and nations having to compete for people. Dubai is winning because the leaders here, the leaders in the UAE overall, understand that they need to compete for people. If they want the best people and they want the best families and they want all sorts of talent to come to this city, which used to just be an empty desert and a small fishing village, essentially, they need to make it attractive to people. They have to attract people from the UK, from the USA, from India, from Canada, from Pakistan, from Nigeria, from all over the world. And they're doing a phenomenal job at this. And there are going to be other nations and other cities and other states where their leaders recognize this. There's also going to be the flip side, where people want to continue to play the old school game, and they're going to want to implement more exit taxes, and they're going to try to make it more, try to make more bureaucracy and make it even more difficult for people to leave. You were talking about 15-minute cities. I'm totally sure there are people who are going to take the more authoritarian approach in terms of the leaders.
Right.
But it doesn't work. If you want to see a good microcosm of this, just look at what's going on in the USA with like migration within the USA itself. So in places like California, they, the leadership want to make it harder for people to leave California. They want to, continue to tax them more. They want to do this, they want to do that. But ultimately, if Florida or Texas or Nevada or Utah is making it more appealing and more attractive, then as long as people can, they're going to make a move. They're going to vote. They'll vote at the ballots. They're also going to vote with their wallets, and they're going to vote with their feet ultimately. And I just see this happening on an international scale. So while there might be some of these sort of legacy countries that want to try to tighten things, I wouldn't be surprised if the UK and Canada and Australia, maybe the USA, if they try to tighten it and make it harder for their citizens to leave and move overseas and take their tax money with them. They can try it, but you cannot beat the free market, not long term. You just can't. It's the same way that you have people who are just like, oh, you know what? We need to tax rich people even harder. There should be a 70% tax, 80% tax. And I've seen people propose a 100% tax on wealthy people. Do you know what will happen if you actually do this? And we know because it's happened historically. They leave.
Of course.
They either find massive loopholes, or they will just go somewhere else. They'll take their money, they'll take their jobs, they'll take their companies, and they'll go somewhere else, which is not so hostile towards them. So I think that there is going to be a fight here. And I think you're going to have more developing countries that in the 20th century, a lot of people would not have considered desirable and that they would not have wanted to move to. You're going to have a lot of them making it easier to move and making it more appealing and dropping their taxes and cleaning up their act. You're going to have more places trying to be like Dubai and trying to be like Doha, trying to be like Singapore. You're going to have more places doing that. And then in the West, because the leaders in many cases are idiots, they're going to keep making their cities and their nations and their states less and less appealing. So you're going to have more people who are just like, you know what? I don't like the direction things are going. They're going to up sticks and they're going to move. And this is going to be a generational thing. It's not immediate. So in the short term, I think they can try all sorts of things and they probably will. But long term, like I said, I think the free market of migration and the free market of economics are just going to win. And at some point, they're going to have to relent. If you're losing, a great example is my home country, the UK. The UK is losing so many good people. 10,000 millionaires left the UK last year, net. The UK lost a net of 10,000 people of over $1 million net worth last year in 2024. And they're just bleeding good people, right? So do they want to keep on doing that? Because those people are they're leaving and they're taking jobs with them. They're taking money with them because they're like, you know what? My country is no longer the best place for me to be. I'm going to up sticks. I'm going to move to the US. I'm going to move to the UAE. I'm going to move to Portugal. I'm going to move to Spain, wherever it is that they're going. And so, these nations need to realize, their leaders need to realize you can't coast forever off of former glory. The UK has been trying to coast off its former glory for a very long time. And you can't do that, especially when other places around the world are improving. In 1925, the city I live in, the country I live in, did not even exist 100 years ago, okay? If we go back 10 years ago, El Salvador was the most dangerous country on earth by homicide rate. Today, it is the safest in the Western Hemisphere. Is it a rich country? No, not yet. But if they continue going in the direction they're going, I could easily see a future 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now where El Salvador, San Salvador, their capital is like the Dubai of Central America.
Absolutely.
And you've got these pockets, you've got places in Africa, you've got places across Europe, you've just got all these places which right now people might not think are attractive or appealing. Who knows, 100 years from now, India might be the freaking place to be, right? Some people will hear that and they'll be like, oh, India, what? Poor country, blah, 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 right? Because they have in their heads what India has been throughout their lifetime. They're not thinking, hey, things change in 50 years. China used to be like dirt poor.
I know.
China used to be really, really poor. Nobody used to even talk about or worry about China. And then we've seen in under 100 years, they've become, if people were to say, what's the USA's biggest competitor in almost anything, from sports to technology to just like wealth, GDP, whatever, a lot of people would be like, yeah, China is obviously the biggest competitor. It used to be Japan they were worried about. It used to be Japan and Russia. Now it's like, oh no, China is the big dog. And that wasn't the case even when I was born.
Right.
So things can change a lot faster than people realize. And that's the point I really want to kind of hit home, that what the world looks like right now and what it's looked like throughout our lifetimes, that doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be like when our kids are our age, let's say.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you talked about 100 years. I mean, we're talking about El Salvador 10 years ago. That is continued. That rate of change, that rate of expansion, and that true rate of change is just, it's on an exponential run right now. I mean, you're talking, you could 2-3 years, places are just turning around all over the place. I mean, Austin, Texas, for a place that happened. It doesn't even seem like it's up to 5 years. It was always a thing, but it just poof, and so in any case, man, listen, this has been great. I know we planned for an hour, we're a little bit over here now, but there's obviously a whole host of places that they can find you. Where would you want to send everybody to first check you out?
Sure thing. So I would recommend finding me on X. Follow me at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. And you can follow me at the same handle on all platforms as well. X, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of them are just at Zuby Music. And if you just search my name, Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, on any platform, you can find me, my music, my podcast. Just search Zuby and you will find me.
All right, guys, there you go. We will put everything obviously up on the screen, down in the show notes. If you're listening to this or if you're watching it, it is in the description. But Zuby, man, really appreciate it. Great conversation, as I expected it to be. And we'll do it again sometime, man.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate you.
All right, see ya.